Hello and welcome to Insiders, a podcast all about the world of television with me, Peter Fincham.
And me, Jimmy Mulville.
It's the podcast for people who love TV and who want to know a bit more about what goes on behind the scenes in show business.
Now, this week's episode is coming live from Content London, the big television conference here in King's Cross, which according to the blurb someone's just handed me, is the world's leading development marketplace and conference with a focus on creating fresh partnerships around the most progressive ideas and initiatives. Good. Well, I'm not sure how many partnerships we'll create in the next 45 minutes. Is this because when you were running BBC One and ITV, you had to go to conferences, didn't you? To kind of
yeah.
Is this a bit triggering for you?
It is a little bit actually. The main conference you have to go to if you're channel controller is Edinburgh, where you have to do controller sessions, and I remember doing those. I think it was 11 years in a row, and you get to a degree after that. I needed a bit of cold turkey after that, so I didn't go to conferences very much.
Why?
Because you know you're on the spot as a channel controller, and you've got an audience out there. The ostensible purpose of it is to talk to producers about what you're looking for. You know, so we're looking for, ideas in this area or that area.
What, like you just say, we're looking for hit TV shows?
Well, you could sum it up as that anyway. But there's also media journalists out there. So if you slightly misspeak or say the wrong thing, you're looking at a headline in the Media Guardian the following day.
So would there be a PR guy from the BBC in the wings?
Would indeed. Yeah, going, oh, God, every time you speak. And so it's nice to be here, free of all that, and to be able to say exactly.
You can slag off anybody you like in this.
You can. I've actually been here at King's Place before. The last time I was here, I'm going to say this is completely irrelevant to Content London. I was playing a duet in a celebrity classical piano concert.
Who was a celebrity? Because it wasn't you.
It was Myleene Klass.
Oh.
And Myleene, if you can picture the scene, the grand piano looks like, Jim.
Yeah.
I was at the bass end doing that stuff.
I've heard you play piano.
And and Myleene was at the treble end doing her bit.
Oh, right.
The audience were out there. So did anybody even notice me at all? No. I don't think so. I could have been a ghost.
So we've just heard one of the stories we're going to read in your autobiography. Now should we crack on with the show?
We're cracking on. So we're going to talk a bit about the current television stories of the moment, and then we'll come to questions. And in that way, we will make a podcast. So Jimmy, what are we talking about first? I know we talk about it every week, but there's another twist in the tale, and it's very current, about the BBC, Culture, Media and Sport Committee. They've written to Samir Shah, following up with more questions after his appearance in front of them last week.
How did that go, do you think, for him?
I think he's under pressure. And I think some people have come out and said that. And people, the kind of the great and good, or the great and good of yesteryear, are coming out and saying, to give you an example, Stuart Purvis, the former ITN chief executive, member of the Channel 4 board, gave Shah a bit of a kicking the other day. He basically said his best was not good enough. Now, I never want to join in this sort of thing. He's doing a really hard job, Samir Shah,
and he's doing it badly. Which is interesting.
And the last thing you want is other people kind of lining up to throw stones at you. I suppose what I would say, in respect of being the chair of the BBC, that the most effective chairs of the BBC over the years, people like people may remember, like Duke Hussey or Christopher Bland. To be honest, they've been bruisers. They have been strong, don't give a damn people who can defend the BBC when it needs defending, can criticise the management when they need criticism. And Samir Shah comes across as a more gentle character than that. Now,
a bit wet, really, to be honest.
Well, again, you're using one word when I'm using another one, but whether that's what the BBC needs in this moment, I suppose, is up there and being debated. But I think it's plain at this moment that he's under pressure, and what the committee are asking is to sort of see the paper trail, to say, how come this story was around for months before it went public? It went public when the Daily Telegraph got hold of it, and how come nothing was said in the meantime? And how was it discussed at the board? Where are the minutes? Can we see them?
Yeah, but there are two different issues there. One is how they got there, and the BBC do that thing of, pretending it's not happening, and then it's happening, and then trying to kind of, the BBC press office then improve it worse by ignoring it. But the other issue is the character of the person who is now the only person who seems to be executive in the BBC, the person who's speaking on the behalf of the BBC. And I imagine people who are working at the BBC want someone to stand up for the BBC. And I think you do need a healthy belligerence. I think you do need a kind of Christopher Bland or a Duke Hussey to be slightly more on the front foot. And I think that's been disappointing for people that I've spoken to at the BBC, who said that they just wished they'd had someone to speak up for them. Because Tim Davie was a great advocate for the BBC. I think he did speak quite plainly. When he left, he said I thought his valedictory speech was very good about, it's time for us to speak out on behalf of BBC journalists. Because we've spoken about this before, we know some very high-profile journalists, like, Clive Murray does Mastermind, and I spoke to him, and he said, we're just really upset that we've been tarred with the same brush of this one mistake, and suddenly now people are talking about you can't trust BBC News, which is ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, Tim Davie, I agree, great champion for the BBC, right to the end and in his kind of leaving speech. But that's the job of the Director General. The Chair's job is traditionally a more ambiguous job because they're not supposed to be a kind of, just sort of tub thumping for the BBC. They're also supposed to be holding the management to account. Samir Shah's job is an unenviable one at this moment.
Well, his main job, from where I'm sitting, is to find someone to
to find a new Director General.
And as soon as
that's not
that,
an easy job
that'll
either.
be the new story.
Yeah. But you can't. You can rush that, but you can't rush it too much because the last thing you want to do is to make the wrong decision soon rather than make the right decision slightly slowly. I mean, Channel 4, as we know, have been without a chief executive, if you date it back to when Alex Mahon said she was leaving, for months and months and months and months. Too long, I would say, partly because they've also been without a chair. So, I'd hope the BBC doesn't go into a sort of endless interregnum here. I don't think that'll be good for the BBC at all.
Like Conclave.
But exactly. So I hope we see some white smoke coming out of Television Centre soon. But at the same time, it's such an important appointment. It's such a difficult appointment. So you don't want to rush it just for the sake of rushing it.
Well, I've been reading that they're looking beyond the usual suspects in the kind of orbit of the BBC because of the new digital age, not the new digital age, but the fact that TV is going through a massive revolution. In fact, one of the hot button topics at this conference has been, the content creator economy, which I'm sure we'll get onto. But that notion that do you need a leader now that's got a slightly different perspective on creating TV or creating content for a screen than you had in the past?
I think you'll find in the past people have said, maybe it'll be somebody from Silicon Valley in America will come in and be Director General of the BBC. And hitherto it never has been, because one thing we know about the BBC, I know from my own experience there, is joining the BBC at a very senior level without ever being part of the rather unique and peculiar culture of the BBC is a really tough thing. The only DG that I'm aware of, certainly in recent history, who joined never having worked at the BBC was Greg Dyke. Now, Greg Dyke was a very popular Director General of the BBC, and I think generally much beloved by the staff. But he, one thing I absolutely guarantee: if you're the Director General of the BBC, a scandal will come along or a big issue will come along. The bullets will start flying, as it were, and although Greg Dyke was a very popular Director General, he came unstuck.
And a BBC adjacent story I read this week, which is a slightly kind of cheerier story, really, is that Gary Lineker has just signed a multi-million-pound deal with Netflix to present a podcast, The Rest is Football, during the World Cup in North America next year. Now, because Gary left the BBC, did he jump? Was he pushed? He was going to present the World Cup for the BBC next year. That was his kind of swan song. That all came to a head over his, the controversial tweeting and stuff. And so he left in a rather summary fashion. And I was really worried about how he was going to, make a living. I'm really relieved. I was thinking of having a whip round for him. The deal is set to dwarf the 1.35 million salaries earned for hosting Match of the Day. and he'll be doing an episode every day of the tournament, and it'll include contributions from his co-presenters, Alan Shearer and...
I love that word, contributions.
Yes, Micah
Yes.
Richards. Now, it's what's interesting is that Netflix, who do huge shows like Adolescence, and I've just been watching The Beast in Me, multi-million-dollar productions, and the well-written and high production values are spending a lot of money on just basically doing a podcast. I
They've
think we
been
should
doing
get
this
round
for a
that,
long
Peter.
time. Joe Rogan and things like that. I mean, so this isn't. I mean, this is a quite eye-catching deal if it's true for Gary Lineker. And I mean, let's put it out there. We are available. We could do it every day at Content London.
And we'll do it
next
for
year.
less than a multi-million pound deal.
Exactly. But I mean, it's a remarkable kind of, the whole, you got to hand it to them. The whole goal hanger thing, the whole Rest Is brand has kind of, created a huge thing there in podcasts. And again, you're absolutely right. So much public attention on how much Gary was paid at the BBC. Why? Because it's public money. The public have a right to know. And in a sense, the public see the BBC as the equivalent to the civil service. So why shouldn't they be paid what permanent secretaries at the Treasury paid? Yeah. But of course, they're also in show business, as we say at the beginning of this podcast every week. Yeah. And therefore, you've got to pay real money. So Gary's, 1.3 million. Yeah. If you look at one end of the telescope, that looks like a very large amount of money for somebody on the BBC. Why on earth are we... You'll read this in the Daily Mail any week. Somebody saying, why are the BBC paying in the inflated salaries to these so-called stars or whatever? These are journalists at the Daily Mail who, by the way, I'm sure go into their own negotiations for their, to try to maximise what they earn. But you'll get that kind of stuff about the BBC. You always have had. Then you look through the other end of the telescope in the world of Netflix and the world of streamers, and where the forces of the market prevail, and you'll see people like Joe Rogan being paid 100 million or whatever to do a podcast. So where is Gary Lineker and what he does between those two extremes? You might ask. Well, now that he's no longer on the BBC, he can get as near to that extreme as he wants, and why shouldn't he?
What's interesting is Netflix are now very happy to put a filmed podcast on their screen.
Yes.
When they started, it was only high-end drama, and now they're kind of expanding their remit. And like people have been talking about here about what do we watch nowadays? There's the content, there's the attention economy. As John Landgraf at the RTS in Cambridge said, there's the attention economy and there's the culture economy. And the attention economy is people who listen to podcasts who just want to just while away the time they're driving into work or on the train. Whereas at home at night, you do want to get your teeth into something which is more meaty.
But Jim, I get that completely. Do you sit down of an evening and say, well, I'm going to watch a podcast now? No, nor do I. So we
just
know,
listen to ours again and again and again.
do you now? So we know this from our own numbers that more people watch us on YouTube than listen to us on podcast apps. But I can't. I mean, why? I mean, it's to me, a podcast is absolutely the perfect thing to do while you're doing something else, like driving on the gardening
or watching television.
Or no, not while you're watching television. But one thing that occupies half of your brain in a podcast of a jigsaw. Over Christmas, I like doing a jigsaw, and I like a podcast on.
You're painting a picture of your Christmases here, and they're very.
Well, I'm talking about the gap between Christmas and New Year, when the world stands still and I get out a 1,500-piece jigsaw and listen to a podcast. But the notion of a podcast as being something you watch when you could watch an expensive drama. You could watch, what were you referring to? The Beast in Me.
Yes.
Something which I have watched, by the way.
Yeah.
That does seem to me to be quite peculiar. Well, I don't want to say peculiar. We don't want to turn down viewers, but it's an interesting. Let's say this. It's an interesting development in viewer and listener behaviour, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that how as independent producers or producers in general are going to square that circle is how much of our time do we spend then looking into the possibilities of monetizing content on YouTube, and also feed the linear, the more legacy, the more traditional forms of TV.
So are these forms merging into one? Maybe the production values of podcasts go up a little bit, television budgets go down a little bit, and you end up in the same place?
Now, at this point,
we should get some questions.
We're going to Owen up, who's fallen asleep.
For those who listen to the podcasts, we know this because people say this to us. Some people think Owen doesn't exist. They think he's a comic figment of our imagination.
Like Columbo's wife.
Her indoors. But he does. And he's going to come on stage now, sit between us here and ask them some questions. So, ladies and gentlemen, Owen Braben.
Thank you both. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Okay, so first question.
All right, Owen.
Can you see an end of conventional legacy TV on the horizon? Does indie production have a future?
Should we start with the second one? I think that's...
Yeah.
But because I'm sure there are independent producers here today, and you and I, Jim, you spent nearly all your career as an independent producer. I had a sort of sabbatical and went to become a broadcaster for a while.
Yeah.
But we got into independent production in the 80s, Hattrick in your case, Talk Back in mine, because we thought this is a growth area, a booming area. Is it a boom area today? What do you think?
Well, I mean, we got into it because we were making a show for an independent producer, and we just thought, well, can't we do this ourselves? We had no idea what we were doing in 1986. But you're right, it's changed a lot, because what happened was there was a growth of smaller companies, of people who flooded out to the BBC and ITV, the two big beasts that controlled everything, to set up their own shops. And then through the 90s and then through the early part of this century, they were hoovered up. The more successful ones were hoovered up by the big aggregators like All3 Media and Endemol and now Banijay. And BBC Studios and ITV Studios, they kind of took these people back in, but they took them back in by buying them, which obviously was very beneficial to the people who set up those companies. So where are we now? I don't know. Would you set up a company now if you were 28?
But to go back to the question, is there a future for independent production? It also depends a bit on definition. Are we saying Fremantle and All3 and Banijay and so are we including them in that three? So do we mean that let's assume that what that question means is there a future for somebody fully independent who mortgages a house, sets up a company, invest in it themselves in the belief that if they have some hit shows, they could eventually sell it for a lot of money and have a life-changing amount of money. Is that still a believable career path? I'm really, really hesitant to say no, because that sounds as if you're somebody who sort of found their way into the castle and want to pull the drawbridge up. I don't want to pull the drawbridge up. People sometimes come to me to say, I'm thinking of starting an independent company. Always I say, well, don't let me put you off. If you believe in yourself, you should do it. You could say, at an extreme, you only need one hit.
Yeah, you do.
You only need to create the traitors. You only need to create the X Factor or whatever. But is it harder now with big consolidated super indies who might be owned by a whole range of people? I think it's got to be harder.
Well, I think what's happening in the commissioning process is that obviously because money is tight, there's more caution, more fear. So at the commissioning end, do the small companies... I mentored a company that was based in Brighton, and access was their problem. They wanted to get access to people who said yes or no. So in our, when we started off, there was a real... Channel 4 had a hunger for talking to new people. Their mantra was innovation, innovation, innovation. Let's do new things. So I think you'll only get new things from the mad creative idea. And will that person be working for Banijay? Quite possibly. Endemol was a big company. It had Richard Osman as the creative director, and Tim Hinks, your new partner, or your not new partner, but your partner in Expectation, who's doing all the work. He and Richard were very creative people, and they could have set up on their own, but they decided to live within a large corporation. I think it depends. I don't know whether people go into being an independent producer with the end game in mind. I think they have a desire to make programs, and they probably don't think they fit within a corporation. I certainly felt like that. I wouldn't last 5 minutes.
But hang on, we didn't have an end game in mind. I can remember when a talk back, this is probably about 1999, people started sort of ringing us up and saying, might you be interested in selling the company? This was never part of a plan. It's no part of a plan at all. It really was a kind of, we think we might be able to just keep our head above water by selling programs to Channel 4 on the BBC. Wouldn't that be nice? And we didn't really feel like we were real companies in that sense. We weren't in the corporate world. And so then people did come and knock on the door, and that was fantastic. No complaints about that. But I guess looking back, that feels like a bit of an age of innocence that I don't think we can honestly say the world is in that.
No, it's a bit like
age
it's a
now.
bit like the music industry. You know, when there's a big outpouring in the late 50s, early 60s, it all felt very organic, and then the money people see there's money to be made, and they kind of, you know, they soak it, they suck it up and turn it into a huge industry. And that's what's happened, is that all these bright young things of the 80s and 90s, they've all sold to these bigger companies and probably have come to the end of their earnouts, and some of them have set up another company.
They're bright young things no more. But I can only say I would hate it if the industry consolidated in such a way that you didn't get new companies with new ideas. I'm just thinking of companies of recent years, not that recent. A company like Hungry Bear. I remember having a meeting with Peter Jones, you know, the guy from Dragon's Den, because he was investing in it, and Dan Baldwin, who'd been working for Talkback, and he said, I want to set up a company. And I did my usual thing, which is say, don't let me put you off, go for it. And that's
It sounds like a warning though when you say it like that.
It's not
Don't let me put you off.
Not at all.
Jump
not at
off
all.
the cliff.
Well, I mean, I
It'll
was
be
the head
fine.
of ITV at the time, so he was probably thinking, will you commission me? Well, yes, of course, if you've got the right ideas. And however many years later, maybe 8 or 10 years later, it's a very successful company. That's not from our generation. That's from a much more recent generation.
I think what's more exciting about the independent production sector is I went to Seoul this year and then to Australia, meeting other producers in other countries who have the same problems that we have here, i.e., your local broadcaster you've done business with for years can't afford now to do the dramas you want to do with them, or even some of the comedies you want, or even some factual you want to do with them, that we're talking about maybe doing co-productions with different countries. Now, that wouldn't have happened in the 1980s or 1990s. So there's an upside to the kind of, we're talking about the maturity of the independent sector. It's going through another phase now where it's having to face the harsh realities of the economics of the business, and we are inventive. So, you know, we're talking to Australian producers about doing co-productions, which actually makes sense both in Australia and in Britain. And I think that's a good thing.
I think that's a good thing. And I think I'd still believe that the sort of separation of broadcasting and production is better and healthier. And of course, we talked about this a few weeks ago, in what's rumoured to be happening at ITV, a sort of vertically integrated model, broadcasting and then big ITV studios, might be about to be broken up, whereby they are not related to each other in terms of ownership. That doesn't mean ITV Studios becomes what we mean by an indie, but it absolutely means that the places where you have production and commissioning, let's say, under the same roof, are becoming fewer, not more, if that happens.
Now,
because there's no production happening at Netflix or Amazon or Apple or Disney. They're not producing their own things the same way. Well, not yet. Channel 4 might be.
The first part of the question was, can you see the end of legacy TV? Now, this always comes up at conferences like this, where people predict the end. And I remember in 2000, where the first .com thing happened, there was lots of people predicting the end of television. People in ponytails talking to us and frightening the life out of us, saying, well, you better get a job in another industry because TV industry's over. There'll be 15-year-olds in bedrooms creating user-generated content. We'll all be absolutely hypnotized by. And then Michael Wolff wrote a book called Television is the New Television about 10 years later. And it was a book which said, you know, this is a book about what happens when a group of very clever people get together and decide something is going to happen, and then it doesn't happen. Because actually what happened was TV grew fat on the advent of the digital age. Because when you have Netflix at the beginning was basically like going through the pound bin in a video store. And then they do House of Cards. Everybody starts subscribing. HBO did the same in the 80s. They were just basically repeats and boxing. And then suddenly HBO now is the home of great drama. So I kind of think that we predict these things at our peril.
Will we still say, I wonder what's on at 8 o'clock tonight in 15? That's another subject and less than we do at the moment. But if it's a football match, we will watch it because it's live.
Yeah.
But if it's another sort of program, and we think, well, why do I need to watch it at the time the broadcaster put it out? Obviously, we're all being weaned off that habit. Our children's generation don't even have that habit. They've never bought the Radio Times, obviously. I think we should move on to another question because we're
running out of time.
We can only take so many. So, Owen, point us in another direction.
Like you, I've been coming to these conferences for years. More now than ever, I'm surrounded by lawyers, distributors, and strategists, and fewer creatives than ever before, all talking about existing IP and how we exploit it. Is this fact?
Okay, so obviously, put your hand up if you're a creative. Well, that's half the audience. Any lawyers in? Nothing wrong with lawyers.
They're too busy out there. They're doing deals out there in the lobby.
What were the other categories?
Distributors and strategists.
Distributors, strategists.
We like distributors and strategists.
One strategist here. I've never been a great believer in, if you like, people who term themselves creatives, thinking, well, we're on one plane and then these other. We're all on the same plane together. We all
I
play
agree.
very important roles. So I think
agree.
my answer to that question is to speak up for strategists,
and I always
lawyers, and so on, and say you have every right to be at a conference like this.
Yeah, and that didn't sound patronising at all. I always say about Hat-Trick is the most creative thing we do is we make shows for the budget and on time. In order to do that, you need a whole network of people. So when the program idea comes in, we need to get it costed out by the production executive. Then we need to do the deals. So the commercial side, the business affairs people get involved, and they are very good at what they do. They get the good deals done, and then it goes through the process, and it's a team effort. And I think that I think that more than ever, producers are having to go to commissioners with not just the creative idea, but the whole package of where they're going to get the funding, who's in it.
Completely.
They want more and more reassurance, don't they?
Before I ever got involved in television, this is back in the 1980s, I was sort of involved tangentially, really, in the advertising business because we used to make we did it together, Jim. We used to make adverts for
that kept me alive.
Now, in those days, it did absolutely paid the bills. We had no kind of pride about it. We were delighted to get the work, but in those days, the advertising business created this rigid divide between creatives and non-creatives. Literally, the creatives would sit on another floor of the advertising agency. They would indeed have ponytails and sort of air about them. We are creatives, and everybody else was put on another floor. I don't think television should ever create that divide. We are all part of a whole, which is to try to create great programs. And independent production companies are those people who are developing, coming up with ideas, and those people who are managing to do deals. They're just all of equal importance. So yeah. I don't really like the premise of the question, which is
so we hope that person's being very ashamed of themselves.
The creators. Let's see if somebody leaves now.
Question.
The creators are being swamped by the strategists and lawyers. All are important. All are welcome. Come on, let's have another question.
This is a development conference. What, in your experience, is the best and maybe the worst way to develop an idea?
Oh, wow.
God, that's a huge question.
I think exposing it too soon to a large group of people is we used to have these meetings at Hat-Trick, and my job was to talk about what was coming down the line, and it was actually going back to the previous question. It was to everybody, so it wasn't just the creative teams, the development teams. It was the whole community. So it was a very mixed bag of people, and we had one person who shall remain nameless, who would always go...
Normally when Jimmy says that, he immediately names the person.
No, I'm not going to name this person. I'm so tempted, but I'm not going to. Okay, so they would say, I'm not even going to mention the fact that she was a woman. But...
all that her name is...
She would say,
Susan.
That doesn't sound like a very good idea. And of course, my mistake was I was exposing the idea at the very beginning of its life. And I think you do need to put a little bit of meat on the idea before you start getting other people's opinions, because otherwise you can get swayed. Ideas that are developed by committee are very difficult. They often default to the bland or the vanilla. And I think what you want to do is you want to harness the kind of the eccentricity of the idea first before you go out into the marketplace.
Funny enough, I do have a memory of when I was in Fremantle, of being at a kind of away day or whatever, because large companies like Fremantle, they love an away day, where there was a presentation about how Fremantle would maximise value from an idea. And it was like looking at a sort of plumbing kind of system, if you like, where ideas would go down a pipeline and then they'd be turned into programs in one market, and then somebody would reformat them for another market, and
like
then
a sausage.
Very like a sausage. Then merchandise would come in, and then books would be written, and blah de blah, and the whole thing. And somebody's saying at the beginning of this thing, yes, but where do the ideas come from? And it completely, utterly ignored that. It just assumed ideas would be there. But of course, ideas are the most precious thing of all, because without those ideas, you haven't got all those other things. And it's very hard to, if you're a large corporation, large company, it's very hard to legislate where ideas from. But I would say, we were talking a few minutes ago about being an independent producer. Is there still a market for that? I really hope there is. One of the qualities you need as an independent producer is the ability or the willingness to look somebody in the eye and say, here is an idea for a television program. We think it's a great idea. What do you think? And that's why it's much harder to be a producer than to be a commissioner, because the commissioner just has to come up with an answer.
Which is usually no.
Well, it's normally I'll get back to you on that one, which
Yeah.
means no.
Interesting idea.
Well,
We're going to circle
One
back.
thing you learn over the years is how to listen quite carefully to these responses.
In America, they say we're going to circle back.
Yes.
And we'll come right back to you. We'll reach out to you.
Yes.
I do think that when someone said to me, what's the key to pitching? I just said, find something you love to pitch, because that will come across in the pitch, and just describe it very clearly and hope that they are listening. And then, the outcome isn't within your control.
But I do think there's more satisfaction in selling an idea than buying it. Because when you get that right, and when you say, here is an idea, it might be a non-scripted idea, it might be a script that you're saying, please read this script.
Yeah.
And when they come back and say, I agree with you, it's brilliant.
Oh, it's great.
That is so.
That is the one of
that's
that's
so
better than sex.
satisfying.
Well, certainly at my age,
That's
it is.
that's another podcast, which we're not making
But
today.
it is a great moment when you can see that they see what you think.
I could say it's a more satisfying thing in that moment to be the producer than to be the buyer, because ultimately you haven't had the idea, they've had the idea. So I always used to say to commissioners, don't make the mistake of looking down on producers, look up to them. They come to us with ideas, and that's a much harder thing to do. But we are slightly ignoring the question here, because what's the best way to develop an idea? I don't think you can really answer that in a huge generality. It depends. It's quite different to develop a non-scripted idea than the scripted idea.
Yeah.
The scripted idea, get a script written.
Yeah.
You can only ever sell an idea of a script in drama
and yet
comedy.
nowadays, I'll just say this: when you're developing a script idea, when you and I started, the broadcaster, as they were in those days, would develop everything for you. They go in, they like the verbal pitch, they pay for everything. They pay for treatment, they pay for script, and now more and more broadcasters, and certainly the streamers, which I think is bizarre, seeing how rich they are. So, well, we'd like you to come at us with a script, which goes back to our previous point about independent producers starting off. If you want to start off being a scripted independent production company, your development costs from the get-go are pretty high, because you're having to fork out £20,000, £25,000 on a 1-hour script. So I think that, in terms of the ecology, I'd like to make a plea that the broadcasters, I know that they plead poverty, but they should be more helpful in the development of ideas at the outset.
Though, when you take a broadcaster or a streamer's or anybody's money to develop something, you're sacrificing part of your independence.
That's true, but if it's a balancing act between your income and your outgoings, very often it's better to get in bed with the broadcaster and go down that road. And you have a turnaround anyway; it'd be like 18 months. But the truth is that I think these days you have to go in with a script, and sometimes a script and a star or a director. Like I said, the bigger the package, the less the fear in the room. Oh,
and have we got time for one more question? Maybe with a yes/no answer, because lunch is coming. Go on.
This is an easy one for you guys.
Right.
And it's was a start on you, Jimmy.
Okay.
What's happened with Have I Got Sport for You? Why have panel shows fallen out of fashion? How can they be refreshed?
Well, we did a pilot with Have I Got Sports for You with Gary Lineker. I can't call him Gary. Or Mr. Lineker, I used to call him in those days, actually. And he did the pilot. It was a brilliant pilot. And then he said he was too tired to do the series. So he was off my Christmas card list for a while. And then we did another pilot with Steph McGovern. And then they loved that. And then she went off to Channel 4 to do your show, Peter. Which I didn't speak to you for 2 weeks. So basically, we then did a pilot with Jason Mountford, which was really good because BBC had some money left over in their development part and said, we really like this show. Should we do a pilot and put it out over Christmas? So they put it out, and it came and went because it was a one-off. And you can't expect to land a show because if your metric is how many people are going to watch that one-off overnight and then over a month, that's not going to convince you.
Well, there's a lesson in there. Beware of the broadcaster who says, we're going to put your pilot out, see what people make of it.
No, I think that they have to then see, when Have I Got News to You got commissioned, they commissioned a pilot and a series at the same time. And the pilot we made was so bad, which we've talked about before on the show, that we wouldn't have got the series these days. But because they booked the series, they had to go on with the series, and we used the pilot, which was dreadful, as a tool to make the series better.
But I would draw another lesson from this, which could be expressed very simply. Panel shows are never in fashion. They're always kind of slightly, oh no, do we really do any more panel shows? But when broadcasters get them and they work, they're fantastic shows.
Yeah.
You look at a show like Would I Lie to You, which I commissioned, so it must be nearly 20 years old now, and they retain audiences and people love them. But for some reason, if you say I've got a new panel show, no broadcaster ever looks excited. I don't know why.
And on that happy note,
There may be a broadcaster out there now who will suddenly want a
I'm
panel
sure they're
show from us.
developing really international, global panel shows at this conference as we speak.
I hope so.
Well, thank you very much for listening,
Thank
everybody.
you for coming. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please do follow Insiders, the TV podcast, wherever you get your podcasts.
If there are any questions you've got about the world of television that you've always wanted to ask, then just send them our way. We'd love to hear from you. You can send us on an email or you can get in touch via our socials. All the info is in the description.
Thanks for listening.